Game reveals are exciting. Fighting games are probably some of the most exciting ones, especially when a new character or a veteran gets unveiled into the spotlight. I don't think anything comes close when it comes to Smash Bros. Announcements now. Nearly a decade now, the internet has seen so many trailers showing off the latest fighters to be revealed in the latest Smash Bros. Titles with a variety of reactions, and these reveals are usually the highlight of the Nintendo Directs throughout these past 10 years. Whether or not the character received praise or disappointment, I've always seen people talk about the latest characters online, which I admit it got tiring a few times, but it's always been exciting for me to see some young requested fighters enter the fray. We've had characters that I expected to be in these games, like the newest Fire Emblem and Pokemon characters, but there were some that were, holy crap, got on some Smash? And so in today's video, I will be discussing my 10 most surprising fighter reveals in Smash, at least the ones I found surprising. I won't just be talking about Ultimate, but also the ones from Smash 4 and Brawl 2. I won't be adding many because I didn't know half of them during the time, like Marth and Ice Climbers. The timing of the reveals are noted here and the impact they had on the series. Before we get to the number 10 spot, I wanted to mention a character I was hyped for and would have been sought, but unfortunately I was spoiled on his reveal due to a Smash leak around the Wii U and 3DS era. Characters like Garchomp and Bowser Jr. were also spoiled, but the one I wanted to talk about is Salt from Xenoblade Chronicles. I felt if he didn't get yeet, Salt's appearance would have been so surprising for people who played Xenoblade on the Wii. While Xenoblade and Monolith Soft are well known across Nintendo fans nowadays, back in the day there was only one niche game at the end of the Wii's lifespan. Xenoblade, along with The Last Story and Pandora's Tower, were available in Japan and Europe. However, they almost didn't make it stateside. If it wasn't for the Operation Rainfall campaign, I don't think these games would have come out there. Even though these games eventually did, Xenoblade was only a GameSpot exclusive with a limited release, so not many people got to experience it. I did play Xenoblade when it came out in 2011, so seeing Salt in my favourite fighting game series made me incredibly happy, and if I didn't get spoiled, his appearance probably would have been in the top 10 for me for how obscure he was at the time, and the development team's choice of including him. Now, let's get to the number 10 spot. We've had characters that we really wanted for years, but we didn't think they would due to different reasons. Like Reggie, he was pointed out multiple times around the series that he wouldn't get in due to his size or whatever by Sakurai. Reggie did eventually get in, which was a nice surprise. However, for me, another villain was even more of a shock. K. Rool was a character I wanted in Super Smash Bros. Ever since around 2013, but I didn't think he would. Now, his build wasn't an issue like Reggie, but out of all the Donkey Kong characters they could have picked, I expected someone like Dixie or Funky to join in the fray since they appeared in more recent titles like Tropical Freeze and the Mario spin-offs, while King K. Rool hasn't made an appearance since Jungle Climber on the DS, and even on home console release since 64. He was included since apparently he was one of the most requested characters in the Smash poll. Seeing him show up for the first time in years to fight DK once again felt amazing. I watched that trailer to death until Ultimate's release, and seeing others react to him with similar emotions was a great feeling, especially for the Donkey Kong fans. One thing I liked about this series is that they include some weird, unconventional characters. Me had Mr. Game & Watts, Brawl had Rob, and Wii U and 3DS had the Vader, Wii Fit Trainer, and Garchomp Duo. It gives the series a certain charm with how absurd and goofy these games are. These characters, who some people wouldn't think would work in a fighting game, actually turn out to be very creative and work as competent combatants. I remember when the final Smash presentation happened just before the base game launch, and Saturday showed off one more trailer for the first DLC character. We saw Mario walking up to a plant pot, and I was thinking to myself, is this a new item? But then we see the plant dodge roll and attack Mario before confirming it to be the first DLC fighter. I was gobsmacked. The size of the Mario representation was already huge, but out of anyone from the series they could have added into the game, like Waluigi, Xena or Nabbit, they chose a common minion to be a fighter. The plant has never been playable in any Mario spin-off, not including P.T. Piranha, who is someone I would have imagined. I had mixed feelings when I saw the reveal, and I think a lot of people did too, but over time, I grew to appreciate its inclusion, being fun to play as. Sometimes the fun characters are the ones you least expected. We've had third-party characters appear ever since Brawl, and within the years, the number of third-party characters have increased. A lot of the time, these fighters have been on Nintendo platforms and are loved by Nintendo fans, especially ones on the NES like Mega Man and Simon Belmont from Castlevania. In Ultimate, we were introduced to our Castlevania rep, being Simon, and out of all the Belmonts, Simon makes the most sense, being the oldest in the franchise, with the first Castlevania game, and the most recognizable towards old Nintendo fans. My reaction was like, cool, I get to listen to some amazing music. But then during the later half of the trailer, they revealed another Belmont, and I was like, oh my god, that's Victor! I was more excited about his inclusion over Simon, since he is my favourite character in the franchise. And if I thought they would have added anyone else from the series, it would have been either Trevor or Alucard. Victor didn't even make it in Castlevania Judgment. Victor did appear on a Nintendo platform with Vampire's Kiss, but that came out late in the Super Nintendo's life, as well as being one of the lesser known titles. His first appearance was in Rondo of Blood, which was originally a Japanese exclusive until the PSP remake, and while his other release was in Symphony of the Night, which is arguably the most popular game in the series, the main protagonist was Alucard. I remember when he was included, a lot of Smash fans were like, who? Since Echo Fighters were already established beforehand with Daisy, it does make sense why he was included too, it being Yoro on this list. But I think out of any third-party character, he is probably one of the more obscure choices, and it was the first time we saw another third-party franchise have two playable characters. The Wii U and 3DS DLC wasn't as grand as Ultimate, starting out with the return of veterans like Mewtwo and Yutis. Ryu was revealed after the veterans, but considering how many guest appearances he has, it's not much of a shock. However, out of all the third-party reveals the Wii U and 3DS had, Cloud blew the fanbase by storm, and not just Smash's fanbase, but the Final Fantasy fans too. I wasn't as hyped as most people, as I didn't really play much of FF7. I was more excited about Ryu and Bayonetta, but I do admit Cloud made a bigger impact in the Smash community. The Final Fantasy series was always associated with Nintendo during the NES and Super Nintendo days, but ever since Final Fantasy VII appeared on the PlayStation, I and many people always associated that game to be part of the PlayStation family. Some people even expected Cloud to be a fighter in PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale instead, just because of how FF7 is connected to the PlayStation brand. Cloud has appeared a couple of times on the Nintendo platform beforehand, like Chain of Memories, but the PlayStation brand was the reason why I and so many other people didn't believe he would appear. If a Final Fantasy character was going to appear in Smash, I probably would have guessed it would have been either Cecil or Terra. His reveal opened up the possibilities of who could appear in Smash, even if they're normally associated with non-Nintendo platforms. The idea of Mario and Sonic appearing in the same game was such a dream to many people back in the 90s and early 2000s. Before the GameCube appeared, Sega and Nintendo were competing against each other in the console business, being one of the earliest experiences of the console wars. Most people thought it would be impossible to see these two collide during the 90s. While Salt was leaked, Sonic was only rumoured with little to no source. Remember the Smash Dojo? That was the website where the development team posted up new bits of info on Brawl, the items, stages, music samples and characters. I always went there every weekday just to see the new thing. On the 10th of October 2007, I remember my brother shouting in excitement, saying, "Sonic is in Brawl!" But I never believed him. However, after I finished a day at college, I opened up the Smash Dojo website and saw him. I couldn't believe it. It was a what the fuck moment. It was right out of the blue with screenshots and the trailer. I wasn't big on Sonic at the time because of 06, but I admit this blew my mind and plenty of other people too. Seeing a former rival to Mario now appearing in the same game as him twice in 2 years was so surprising, especially being both a Sega and a Nintendo fan. So, how do you temporarily break Twitter?
It's not gonna be Steve. Oh my god. Is Minecraft Steve?
Oh my god! What?
What? No!
Oh my god! They're capping! They're capping! They're fucking capping! This is not real! This is not real!
Let's go! Let's go! Oh my god!
But no! No! I have the creeper! It's not Steve! It's not freaking Steve! If it's Steve, I'm dead!
I don't fucking believe it.
Wow! It's Steve! Oh my god!
I can't believe what I'm witnessing.
While I wasn't as excited for Steve compared to K. Rool or Victor, as I'm not into Minecraft, I was more astonished by his inclusion, especially with ants, Enderman, and a zombie as palette swaps. A lot of people were too, especially since it was talked a lot about within the week they were revealed, even for people who don't play the game. Minecraft is huge, being one of the best-selling video games of all time, with tons of merchandise. But like Piranha Plant, I didn't fathom that he would be a fighter with how he would play or animate. I thought there was a possibility for a Minecraft stage and maybe a Mii costume, but not him as a fighter. I didn't particularly want him in, but when he finally came out, he's fun to play against with having a complex yet creative moveset. With how he broke Twitter within a day, he should be at least in the top 5 of this list. Third-party characters reveals are quite common nowadays, and not just in fighting games. Smash is no exception, especially with Ultimate's cast, but the series didn't have any until Brawl, and even then there were only 2 characters, one of them being Sonic, who I previously mentioned, and he wasn't even the first third-party character to be revealed. I was so excited when the Brawl trailer dropped. We saw Meta Knight, Zero Suit Samus, Wario, and Pit, who I didn't know at the time debuted in the series. When it seemed that the trailer was about to end, this iconic sound played. I didn't believe that Solid Snake was about to join Brawl. I was just getting into the series at the time with games like the Twin Snakes and Sons of Liberty, so I was over the moon. I was surprised not just because it is a non-Nintendo character, but out of any third-party characters that could make it into Smash first, I wouldn't have suspected Snake. Heck, I wouldn't even expect him to be the 10th Death character. While he did appear on Nintendo platforms beforehand, I always associated him with the PlayStation brand, plus his series seemed a bit more mature compared to Nintendo's lineup at the time. If Snake was announced during Smash 4 or Ultimate, I don't think I would have put him high on the list, but just the fact he was the first made me put him in the number 4 spot. He opened the floodgates of who to join in the roster for the sequels. Cloud was an exciting reveal for many, and Detonator stage was just as cool. Unfortunately, when Cloud was included in Wii U and 3DS, there weren't much in the music department, only having 2 tracks, neither of them even being remixes. This was the same for the base game of Ultimate and the first season pass, until the second pass with DLC Fighter number 8. I don't care for the Game Awards, but Sephiroth's introduction was so cool, demolishing the final boss in the World of Light campaign, and I don't remember him being rumoured or leaked. With the act of Final Fantasy content we got until his reveal, I did not expect another Final Fantasy character or even a third Square Enix rep, especially Sephiroth. We even got another stage from 7 and more music, not just remixes, but also tracks from the film Advent Children. Before his inclusion, every other third-party fighter was the main protagonist of their own series, or at least an echo to the protagonist. But Sephiroth became the first third-party villain to become playable, and plays different from his arch nemesis Cloud. I hope that with Sephiroth's inclusion, we may get to see a few more third-party villains in future titles. There were 2 characters I did not think would ever appear in Super Smash Bros., but eventually did. I meant to say 3 characters, as the ones I will be talking about is none other than the iconic duo Banjo and Kazooie. I would have thought Banjo and Kazooie should have had a chance to appear in the first 2 Smash titles, since at the time, Rare, the developers of the series, were owned by Nintendo, and were in their big team for the Nintendo 64, spawning tons of games. However, if you were a fan of Rare's titles, then you know they got bought out by Microsoft around the time the original Xbox launched. Being bought out by a competitor meant I thought they had no chance. It felt like an impossible dream, like if they made a Samus skin for the new Halo, or having Ratchet and Clank in Smash. This was also before Steve was included, and Microsoft was only touching the waters of crossplay. Out of Microsoft's lineup, I wouldn't think they would add them since they haven't had a new game since 2007, and would have chosen someone like Master Chief. Thankfully, Microsoft was more than willing to have the bear and the bird to reunite with their N64 pals. I remember watching the E3 2019 Direct, and we had 2 Smash reveals, the first being the Dragon Quest heroes, but they saved the best for last. I was thinking it was going to be another Donkey Kong character, and at the time I didn't realise there was a Diddy bouncing around. They did the same gag with K-Rool, and when I saw him, I was screaming at the top of my lungs with excitement. I adore the original Banjo-Kazooie game, and seeing them here was the second most exciting reveal. However, there was someone who tops him. If we're talking about the impossible pits, Sora from Kingdom Hearts would have been in my list. While Banjo and Kazooie had the obstacle of being owned by a rival company, Sora had a drawn it to death due to licensing issues. Not only did we have 3 Square Enix characters, but the development team also had to go through Disney, who, like Nintendo, are very protective of their IPs. I remember people clamoring for his inclusion ever since Brawl, but I used to sigh of the idea of his inclusion because of how difficult it would be. However, like the previous characters I mentioned, the joke was on me, as Sakurai and his team pulled off the impossible. Not only did we get him, but we also got many variations from his KX1 design to his KX3 design. We even got the tiniest river design from KX2, which is my costume of choice. Since the team had to negotiate with both Square and Disney, some sacrifices were made, since we got no new remixes and no mention of Disney characters like Donald and Goofy. A final smash with them would have been so cool, but we did get the amazing stage of Pyro Bastion that features a cool dive of the heart area which shows off the original characters. Sora being the final ultimate character was the perfect send-off to the game and made his reveal that much more exciting. I was watching that trailer thinking it was going to be a lukewarm ending, as a Dark Souls character was going to be announced, but when Mario threw the Keyblade, I was jumping and screaming all the way through. With Swords and Hughen and the rest of the cast, it is going to be difficult for the next game in the series to one-up Ultimate, but I'm sure the amount of hype would remain the same. I hope you enjoyed this video and let me know in the comments which characters surprised you the most, or who were you most excited for. Take care and have a wonderful day.